Okay, Lani, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's been a long
Yeah,
time coming.
I know, I was gonna, just for context for everyone listening, we've been trying to record together for a long time. And there have been many hiccups, but we made it. We're here,
Yay.
finally connecting. So let's chat. I want to learn about you and where yoga started for you. So when did you first start practicing yoga and how did it impact you?
And it's so funny that this conversation is actually happening right now because I was reminded recently of how yoga started for me. So I went to college in Miami and at University of Miami, and I had very good self-esteem up until I went to college. And then 4 years in Miami was really tough. I'm very short. I just never felt like I fit in. I mean, I had a lot of friends, but Miami's like a big city of everything, like very tall models, like beauty, like just this whole external way of being in. And I struggled with that. And I had a good time there, but I know that like I was like in the process of trying to find myself and figure myself out. And I was very into exercise, but I wasn't into yoga yet. Like I did a lot of like step classes because it was like the early 90s, late 80s that time.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually I then moved to Boston, and I was with friends, and I left Miami. I went to Boston. I'm from New Jersey, so I came back up east, and I knew that I needed to like figure out what am I doing with my life. I decided I wanted to be a teacher, and I started teaching in a preschool. And I actually started therapy because I was really like just struggling with like who I was and what was going on for myself. And why this came up for me recently is because I was just in Miami or just in Florida visiting, and I was with college friends, and we were like kind of chatting about it about that time. So I decided to I went to therapy, and my therapist was like, maybe you should try yoga. That might be really good for you. And I didn't really know anybody doing yoga, but I found some DVDs, and I feel like other people had said this at that time. Like I was doing Rodney Yee.
Yes, that's the
Like,
one
we
we
had
always
like
hear.
probably one of the only DVDs at the time or something, or VHS. I mean, I think they weren't even
Yeah, it
DVDs.
might have been VHS.
It was VHS. So I started doing Rodney Yee, and what's so funny is like I loved it, and he was very Iyengar, like he, very, just about the form and alignment. And later on, I went to a yoga journal conference where I did take like one of his workshops, and to me, he was like this rock star yogi. And I just didn't really like him as a person after I took that workshop. I'm like, oh,
I
I
took
don't
one of
really
his
like him.
workshops too. Yeah.
It's so funny how you like I was doing the same DVD over and over again. And then I started teaching in this preschool in Boston, and one of the moms of one of my kids, one of my students, was a yoga teacher, and she invited me to come to one of her classes. And that was it. I was like hooked, and it became like just, like yeah, I just knew it was like just the thing for me. And at that time, it was when I started like really figuring out how to not eat fat free and take care of my body and like, eat well, whole foods. Like I really went through a whole transformation during that mid-20s period where a lot of people, go through that transformation of who are you as a person, and, what do you want from your life? And yoga really impacted me at that time. And I was all in.
And so then when did you go from having your own practice to then deciding that you wanted to bring it to children? Was it while you were teaching in the preschool or?
So not at that point, but then when I went to graduate school, I got my master's in early childhood education at Lesley University in Cambridge. And it was really funny. Like I couldn't get a job in the Cambridge or Boston or Brookline public schools. It was like really hard for some reason, very competitive at that time. So of my brother's friend's father was a principal at a school in Coney Island in Brooklyn, and he needed a first grade teacher. So I was like, all right, I'm moving to Brooklyn. And I'm from Brooklyn. Originally, my parents are from Brooklyn. So my parents were like, wow, you're going back to Brooklyn, like back to our roots. And so, and it was a great place at that time too. Like I moved to Park Slope before, even anything was built up in Park Slope.
Yes.
And it was a very cool place to be. And I was teaching in Coney Island, and I did that for 5 years. And it was the late 90s, early aughts, I guess you call it. And I just started doing yoga with my students in the classroom because I was teaching in a very underserved community, very at risk. And this is what's different now too, is like I was teaching first grade. I did not have a para in my class. I had like 22 kids. And I'd say in first grade, maybe 5 or 6 of them were all being evaluated for special needs. But because they didn't have an IEP set up yet, they couldn't give me a para. But there was always like a huge handful of kids who had something going on. And as one teacher in a classroom, it was impossible. I mean, I spent those 5 years. I learned how to discipline. I learned how to talk to kids. I learned how to engage with kids. I learned how to get kids to listen. I was an okay, like, teacher, like being a teacher was one thing, like teaching like the actual, lessons, but like figuring out how to teach was like those 5 years. I cried a lot, very challenging, but I started bringing the yoga in, and that was when it happened. And I was like, you know what? These kids are now actually able to focus and sit for 5 more minutes if I get them up doing warrior poses or a lion's breath. And it was working. And I'm like, this is amazing. I love teaching them. And I would have a center for yoga in my classroom, and nobody else was doing this that I knew. It was like 2000. And the kids would use my books that I had, these early yoga books that I found, and the kids would do yoga in the class. In that corner, there was like one card deck. It was a really like primitive looking card deck. Yoga pretzels didn't come out till a little bit later, which was one of my favorites, but very basic. And the kids would take it upon themselves. They'd pretend to be me. They did the yoga. It was fabulous. And it was just, I saw something in that. And then at that point, I got my 200 hour in Nosara in Costa Rica. And I was single and living in New York. I was able to go and do a month. Who can do that?
Yeah.
These days, right?
Yeah.
So I did a month in Costa Rica, interdisciplinary. I loved it. It was wonderful. But I taught one adult class when I came back at a studio in Brooklyn where I was practicing. And I'm like, nope, not for me. This is not my jam. I knew I had to teach kids. And so I started like figuring out like who out there is teaching kids yoga. Somebody must be. So I did Radiant Child. So Shakti Kaur was doing like a workshop at a studio in Freehold, New Jersey, right near where my parents live, where I grew up. It was my mom's friend's studio. And she's like, you should come take this workshop. And that was it. I learned Fly Like a Butterfly, and I still sing that over 20 years later. And I'm still singing Fly Like a Butterfly.
They love it. They love it.
Doesn't get old.
So, wow. So you did that workshop. And then when did you decide to start your own business, to start Full of Joy Yoga? Did that come later on when you started teaching more?
So after 5 years teaching in Brooklyn, I'm like, so what ended up happening is I met who was going to be my future husband, Chris. Like we met each other. We both love the band Fish. We follow Fish around. That's how we met. And we kind of like, he was moving to San Francisco, and I was like looking for a change. I'm like, I don't really want to live here in Brooklyn anymore. Like I'm ready. I was almost going to move to Spain and teach. And then I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to move with you to San Francisco. So I ended up that summer, I took Jodi Comator's, Next Generation Yoga. I took her training, and I was one of her first teacher trainings. It was probably like in her third group or whatever that she ever did in her new studio in New York City. And I took that training in 2001, I believe, or 2002, I think it was. So 20 years ago. And that was it. And then I moved to San Francisco with Chris. And this was crazy, actually. I got an email, and I still have no idea who it was from. I got an email from this guy who said, somebody told me you're a kids yoga teacher. We're looking for a kids yoga teacher in our preschool in San Francisco. I'm like, oh my God, I'm moving to San Francisco. He's like, I know, that's why I'm asking you. And so I had a job. I moved there with a job teaching in a preschool. I didn't make that much money, but I got my teaching kids yoga education because I just had kids all day, like 5 at a time in a closet all day, that I would just like practice how to teach kids yoga.
Yeah. Oh, that's
I'm like,
that's the best way to learn, is to actually just dive in. And it's funny you said a closet. Like we've all been in that situation. They're like, here you go. Here's a hallway. You're going to teach here. And you're like, oh, okay, yeah, we'll make this work.
Exactly. So I like had my own little yoga closet, and I would bring 5 kids in at a time, and we would do all kinds of stuff. And I'm like, you know what, this is this is great. This is what I want to do. And so and I was wearing like a shirt. It said full of joy on it. And my husband was like, that would be a great name for your business.
Yes.
And so that happened in 2004. And I was still determined to get kids yoga like in the classroom in the school day, the way I was doing it. But nobody would give up, it's time and money. Those are the two things that's classroom, like schools, principals, like they don't have the money and they don't want to give up the time for something like that. Even in San Francisco, nobody else was really teaching kids yoga in San Francisco either at that time. I was one of the first. And I did it in preschools and after school programs. So easy to get those kind of jobs. I was able to teach full time, doing my stuff. And then a friend of mine and we like created a kids yoga teacher training at that time too. It was like 8 hours. It was short enough, but enough like to teach other people to start doing it.
Wow. So you've been in this 20 years now. So
I feel like even more because I was doing it in the classroom too.
Right. Yeah. So more than 20 years you've been doing this work. I've asked a number of people how they've seen the industry change, but I'm more curious with you, like, how do you think you personally have changed within your teaching and even just I wonder how it impacts you just as a person. Do you see an evolution with your work over the last over 2 decades?
Oh my God. It's so funny because I've done a lot of work throughout the years, like with Jody Kamator, like she was my mentor and I like did the Africa Yoga Project with her in Kenya, which is a whole other thing. But I've done a lot, and she had the Tabaki, which is the Biz of Kids Yoga, which I also like helped facilitate. Like I did a lot of stuff. So I was in and out of different, like I dabbled with like different pieces of the kids yoga business, like with her, without her too, but also like kind of figure out like what is my like I spread very thin for a really long time where I would teach everything everywhere, anybody who asked. And then I'm like, oh, I can't do this because how do you even have like, how do you market yourself? Because the marketing piece, like this is something I've always been a one-woman show, like from the very beginning. And I've never had anybody work for me. I've had teachers be independent contractors for me, but not like an assistant or anybody who like, and for years, I'm always like, I need an assistant. Like I've always like had this longing for like to grow. And then I would come to this conclusion, like, but if I really wanted to grow, I would have grown, or I would. And I just never have. And I've kind of enjoyed just having that control. And I had a partner for a little while, Jen Beyer from Play Yoga for Kids. We had met at one of the yoga conferences and like through like Tabaki. And we ended up working on my Mindful Yoga Breaks curriculum, which is a whole other side of like what I had created at one point in time, which I'm still doing. And we worked together and that was great. And we like kind of shared it. And that gave me a little foray into like how to share what I created with somebody else and form like a partnership and all of that. And then we went our separate ways. We're still really good friends, but she decided she had other things going on and we just stopped working together. And now I'm all by myself, but again, which is great. But I think I've like been up and down through this business of like, how much have I wanted to grow? What kinds of classes do I love to teach? Like, where do I love to teach best? And what like just fills me up and brings me joy all the time? And like, what am I saying yes to? What am I saying no to? And I think that is what has changed through the years of like, and then the pandemic is a whole other story.
Yeah, we'll get into that too. So that's it. So it's like a level of discernment that you're able to fine tune over the years. I totally get that too. Like when I first started SAME, I would just say yes to everything, which I think is actually important when you're starting, because the only way you're going to figure out, okay, what do I like to do? What do I like to teach? Where do I like to teach? All of that, you really have to just do it. But yeah, after a while, you can get to a point of just burnout because you're just, like you said, spread so thin, you're doing everything. So yeah, it sounds like you're at a place right now where you've been doing it so long, you know better what you enjoy. What right now for you is your biggest passion in this work now that we're 2 years into the pandemic now? It's March. Yeah. So what would you say your passion is right now that really makes your heart sing?
All right. So this is really funny too, because this goes with like what I've learned about myself in this world, in this work that we do.
Mm-hmm.
So preschool has always, like I taught preschool before I taught first grade. And then I've always been teaching the yoga in the preschools. And then it got to a point at some point where I was said, I just need to find teachers to teach all my preschool classes. I'm kind of over it. And there was this moment in time where I was like, not wanting to teach preschool. And this one school where I've been teaching for 13 years now, and they have 3 centers, and I almost found a teacher to teach for me there. And it never worked out. And I kind of got through that hump. And I'm like, oh my, I like now it blows my mind that like, how did I even want to give this up? Like, I can't even imagine that I would not be teaching preschool yoga. It just brings me the most joy. I just love it so much. And I
Yeah.
can't, and I'm still at that school. And they kept me going through the pandemic. They're Reggio Emilia based school. So they're like outdoor learning, emergent learning, like the best possible place I could be doing the work I do. Like I could go in without a lesson plan and they're like, we're studying trucks. And I'm like, all right, it's truck yoga. Like that's
Yeah.
just how it is. Like I usually have a plan in my mind of what I want
Mm-hmm.
to teach. But if they have a theme that they're studying, I'm like, great, let's do that for yoga today.
Yeah.
And through the pandemic, I taught there the entire time, except for those 3 months of quarantine. And I've been
Yeah.
outside in every kind of weather because that's what they
That's
do. And
right.
and I just, so the preschool, I mean, I do a few other things that I really love too, and the family yoga. Oh my God. But I haven't done family yoga in 2 years. Oh my God.
Right. I
I
know, I
miss
can't
that.
believe it's been that long since this all started. Well, I also am curious for you after all these years, looking back, or do you have any favorite stories of when you really see that impact of the work you're doing? Is there anything that sticks out to you?
I mean, I have one, like, so, I also love going into the elementary schools and teaching the mindful yoga breaks curriculum. I mean, that's what I'm like, we'll talk about that like for during the pandemic, how that's worked out. But
Right.
like, I definitely see those glimpses there of it working. But there was one story that definitely always stands out for me, and that's in the preschool that I go into. So I teach my mindful yoga breaks curriculum. I teach about the brain and the wise owl and the bulldog, the prefrontal cortex and amygdala. That's what I call them. And the kids love it. Here's my guys. I actually have them. So my wise
Oh,
owl, my
cute.
bulldog.
So she's
And
got, those of you listening, there's little stuffies of the bulldog and the owl. Love it.
so that's how I teach it in the preschools too. And I do it very simple, but like the kids get it. It's very concrete for them of what's going on in their brain. And one little girl always, and I know her now, she's like in 4th grade now or something, but she always had a very hard time with transitions. So getting to yoga was very tough for her after like leaving whatever center, whatever she was doing previously. And they had a little like peace corner, whatever they called it in the classroom, with my poster and the couple of like the little toys in there, just like, mindfulness stuff. And she was in a meltdown, and she looked at the poster, like the teacher guided her through like what we've talked about and what they do there, and picked like which breaths she wanted to do, did her breath, got herself calm, and like came to yoga. Like she used all the tools that I've taught her and that the teachers follow up and teach. And you're like, it works. The
Yes.
more you
Yes.
practice it, it actually works. Like she
Yes.
was in it and knew that she can pick a breath, do the breath she wanted to do, get herself calm. Oh my God, it just like
Yeah.
makes me emotional just thinking about it, because like when you actually see it work.
Yes. And that there's two things. So the first is that the teachers were implementing what you were
Mhm.
doing, which I think is so amazing. It's even more powerful when you're in a school and then the teachers reinforcing what you've taught, so then the kids are really understanding it. And then the second is that she applied it when she was at that state. So that's the
Right.
whole reason we do this work, and we teach
Yes,
them and we have fun when they're in a good mood and they're in a, an open headspace, because then when inevitably we all have our meltdowns in those moments, she was able to access it because
exactly.
she had practiced it. Oh, I love that
I,
so
I mean,
much.
I, it was like all of us teachers, we were all like, oh my God,
Yes.
see, it
Yeah.
works.
Right. That kind of leads to my next question, which is what has kept you going in the industry for 20 years, but even I would say, especially in the last 2 years during a pandemic, when you're maybe not, well, you were teaching in person. So I was going to say maybe not having as much as the in-person interactions that could keep us going, but staying in this for so long, what do you think has kept you going?
That's a great question because I've definitely had my moments of like burnout where I'm like, I have to do other things. Like I'm just so tired. At the very beginning of the pandemic, like everyone else, like I jumped on the like, I'm going to just keep doing videos and offer videos and blah, blah. It was like remotely. And I did it for a few months. When I was able to start going back to the preschools, I was like thrilled because I'm like, oh, in person, this is fantastic. And I did camps that summer too. And we were like, lots of the masking and I tried the shield and we did all the things.
Hmm.
And then I got really fortunate. So because I've been in the same place for like 14 years, almost 15 years, I've made a lot of connections. I've had a lot, like everybody knows me and they know my business. And even in the pandemic, when it could have gone global and it did for a little bit, I decided I need to help my community. Like this is my community. I'm tired. Like I was tired of all the being remote and Zoom and all of that stuff. I'm like, I'm just staying in my own community and seeing how I can help here. And that felt like exactly true and authentic to like with the kind of person I am. Like the globalness at first felt like, oh, look at this. We can all like share our work with the whole world now. And then all of a sudden I'm like, but there's so many of us doing this in all parts of the world. We should really still focus on our own community and what we can do to help.
Hmm.
And so New Haven Public Schools has been like this. My son was in the New Haven Public Schools. Now he's not, but I've been so tied to them for all these years. That's where I started my mindful yoga breaks curriculum in the schools, doing exactly the work that I wanted to do all along, like teaching a curriculum of yoga, mindfulness, breathing in the school day. So because I've had these relationships with a lot of these schools for like the last 6, 7 years, I was able to form, and I was going into the schools, all these schools I've had contracts with. It's been fantastic going in. And one of the organizations called the Trauma Coalition, they got me, they had me do 3 different schools. I signed these amazing contracts where I put together this entire year-long program online, like remotely. It's so much work and so much setting up of like scheduling with teachers and classes and blah, blah, but like it's so rewarding. Like I'm even today, like today was my day. I taught and I did this all last year and now I'm doing it all this year. And it's keeping me going in that like I'm still doing my work. I can't even believe that I can still do this work in the schools. They're like, they have the technology now, they can take their screen and I'm on the big screen in these classrooms. Each grade does it together. So I have like 3 first grade classes signing in and on Google Classroom. And here I am like teaching my 20-25-minute lessons and then chatting with the kids after, finding out what they love, how they feel. Today I did my superhero lesson. It was like fantastic. There's parts of it that are very exhausting. Teaching 6 classes in a row virtually is not easy. And the kids are like, when do you come in, Miss Lani? We were like, I'm dying to get into these schools and see these kids in person soon. I hope, maybe. But like the fact that I can do this like this, and then I can go into these preschools and just be with these kids, like, I just love the work. Like I feel, and I can make my own schedule and I work in the mornings and I'm free in the afternoons and I'm still doing the work I love, as tiring as I did, and I can work from home. And I could be around for my son. Like everything about it is just, and I'm doing this work, like, and I'm helping kids, I'm helping teachers.
Right. Yeah. You know what I love that you said is that I feel like in American culture, it's like we all feel like, oh, we have to get bigger and more global and reach more people. And what you're saying about the importance of community and where you actually are. And it's all going to depend. Every person doing this work is going to have a different vision, and someone might have that more, it might feel more fulfilling to them to have that global mission. For example, like this podcast, I love connecting people around the world.
Right.
But it's like then your own, I love what you said, like, and then look around in your community. It's kind of like that idea of it starts like in your family, like how you are with your family. That's really, where you're grounded down and how you're interacting there is important. So thank you for just reminding us of that and saying the fact that you're like, at first it was cool. And then you thought, wait, you've been doing it long enough that you kind of knew that you're like, no, it's more, it's here right now that I
Yeah.
have to be.
Like my community's struggling. Like I
Right.
see so many struggles right here in my schools, like where I live. And like, I just need to, and then that helped me because, we're all so tired. We're all living this trauma of this pandemic, even if like you aren't, even if you don't have that other trauma piece, but we're all living this trauma right now, and how to like step out of like, we're kind of coming off of the at the end of it, but like stepping out of our house every day, we're navigating like how to be safe, how to keep our families safe. So for those people who are still living in a trauma situation, who were previously filled with like had trauma going on in their lives, now it's like up to here. For everybody else who like maybe like it's a low level of trauma but still there, like our bulldogs are at this heightened state at all times, and trying to figure out like where is my place in this work. Like I have these tools, how do I use them appropriately but still take care of myself? Like it was like it's a big balance, because I know I have it, like I have everything. Like I have a house, I have a great family, like I have what I need, I have all my needs being met, yet I'm still feeling this little bit of like, that little bit of trauma of stepping outside the house. And then just with the politics and the whole political climate that we're living in, and just the government, like all of it, it's just a lot. And then social media, which I've worked very hard lately in the last week, like to just not be on as much, and it's really hard, but.
Yes. Yeah. I find myself when in those states of saying like social media breaks, like I need to step away. And as much as it can connect us, it could also disconnect us from ourselves. I think we're too in it.
But I am honestly every day, I'm like, should I be on TikTok? Should I be doing videos on TikTok?
Well, the pressure is real. Yeah, I know.
And I'm like, no. And that is another big part of the business, is like how to keep up with what everybody's doing, because some people like, your friend Lauren from Yogi Beans, like her TikTok is fantastic. Like Margot from Calm Cookie. Like I look at all these videos and there's so many others like doing amazing stuff. And I'm like, I question it. I've been questioning it for years, but if I then start figuring out TikTok, I'm like, what's the next thing I'm going to have to figure out?
Right.
And I can't, and that is where I question a lot of this too. And then I'm like, okay, I'm just going to stay doing my teaching in my community and be okay with that.
Yeah. And with Lauren, her videos are amazing, and she comes from a theater background, like her background, she's an actress. So it's fun, we all have our unique voice, and it's going to lend itself to certain things that work. Right. And I think what you're saying, like the most important thing is like constantly dialing back and sitting with yourself and thinking, okay, well, what is it that I want to say, or what makes me feel good to create?
Yeah.
And sometimes that means just cutting off social media for a little bit and that
saying no. And
yes,
we know the compare and despair thing. Like I'm like, okay, stop comparing. But you know what? Like watching everybody else's videos, like I took something from you, like I told you this, and I never told you what it was, I don't think. But one of your activities you did with your adorable kids, I loved it, and I incorporated it in. So like to me, I'll tell you what it is. It is like I love like doing that. Like now it's just I'm just using everybody else's videos as like just ideas to keep me fresh.
Yeah, exactly.
After doing it for so long, and I'm like, I'm okay with that too.
Yeah, it's nice to have that inspiration and because right, it kept to keep it exciting for yourself with what you're teaching.
So you did that like where you had your daughter like and your son like they did in a different word.
Oh yes, they
like
chose different words.
Like as a different word, and how like any word can help calm you, like the sound of like you can use any word. So I have kids do that, and it's hilarious. You're like truck, sparkle, fancy, fairy, unicorn. Like
exactly, it's cute, right? It's adorable. It makes it fun for them.
Exactly. And so that I'm like, okay,
great.
I don't need to be the one out there on TikTok anymore. Like I could be
right,
taking what I need and just staying true to myself and what brings me joy, basically.
Absolutely. Well, I want to hear about, you have a newish book. I know we were when you were promoting it, I was going on maternity leave, but
Yeah.
so can you just tell us a little bit about the book?
Yeah, so this was exciting. So I had a book that I self-published ages ago that I don't even like, I just use it as a tool, like when I do teacher trainings, and I just like it goes like as like a little book to go with that. So that was exciting when I self-published years ago, but then a publisher came to me and asked me to do a book, and that was incredible feeling, and it was an incredible experience. It's called Yoga Games for Kids. It was like they pitched three different books that could be a possibility for me to do, and then that was the one that I really wanted to do. It just like it's wonderful, and I loved the process of working with this publisher. They were so enjoyable to work with. I was able to be creative, and like they basically like have ideas of how they want you to write their book, but like they hire experts to like fill in the pieces. And I was able to just, use my creativity in such a way that I hadn't in so long. And I loved writing for them. It's a beautiful book. It's called Yoga Games for Kids. You can get it on Amazon or through my website. What was funny is the way they saw games is different than the way we as kids yoga teachers see games, because it's not really like yoga games. It's more like little sequences that tell a story.
Oh, okay.
So it's like a little different than what we as kids yoga teachers see as games. And that was fine, because just how we all teach is like storytelling, like
Exactly.
take them on a journey. And trying to be creative and doing that with 2 or 3 pose sequences was very challenging, but also really rewarding and fun. And I love the book. I love it. And I'm hoping to do another one.
Awesome. Yeah, everyone check it out. It must have been nice to like collaborate on something within this. And also they're outside of kids yoga, so you're coming in as the expert. So it's kind of cool. They saw it from a different point of view. It's nice to kind of get outside of ourselves sometimes and see it differently.
They're a great publishing company. It's called Callisto Media. They do really beautiful books, great illustrations. It's just such a pleasure and a joy to be able to do something different like that. And during the pandemic, it was awesome.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Well, I'm excited to hear your kids yoga gem being in the industry for so long, through pandemics, you've moved, you've taught all around the country. So what would be your big piece of advice for people in the kids yoga industry?
Be able to be flexible, right? Because things aren't always going to go the way that you envision with everything about this, being with kids, scheduling, like all of it, just being flexible and be authentic, be true to yourself. Like Jessica and I said, like you want to say yes to everything, but also at some point find like what your voice is, and being true to yourself, and stick with what brings you joy. Yes. Because there's so much out there. And I think just finding your own joy in the way that you teach. And I hope that all makes sense.
Yes, full of joy yoga. Hence, yes, full of joy. So true. Follow the joy. Well, where can people find you? I know we talked about social media. Where can people find you? Social media, your website, your email? Like, what's the best way?
So I do have my website, fullofjoyyoga.com. I'm on Facebook. It's Full of Joy Yogi, and Instagram is Full of Joy Yogi. Instagram is a little combo of my own personal life and business. I didn't separate it out, but those are probably the main places. I also have a YouTube channel with a lot of videos on there. So a lot of stuff. I've done a lot of stuff in the past. So like lots of good stuff is on the YouTube channel, and I'm going to continue. Actually, I'm creating a video series to go with the book. So that'll be.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah. Lani, thank you so much. I'm so glad we finally connected. It was so good to talk to you.
This was great. Thank you so much, Jessica. Keep doing all the amazing work you're doing too.
Oh, thank you. Have a good one.
You too. Bye.
Bye.